Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Greiner with Basin Safety Training. This is August 2019's safety meeting. We're going to be going over personal protective equipment and risk assessment for different types of sites in the oil and gas industry. So PPE, what do you need to know about it? We're going to be covering a few different things today. First of all, the PPE hazard assessment process, why different types of PPE are selected, and know how to properly wear and care for your PPE. So real quick quiz here. Let you guys look at these four statements and determine which one's right. Now, most of you at this point are going to want to go ahead and fast forward past and see which ones are true or false. Well, that would work. So we're just going to go ahead and go through it a little bit quicker here. So 4 questions. Hazard assessments are conducted only for job functions that involve hazardous materials. Your employer is responsible for selecting PPE. PPE should be inspected before each use, and it is not important to keep your PPE clean. If you guessed your employer is responsible for selecting PPE, you would be absolutely correct. That is the correct question or statement in that lineup there. Thank you very much for playing that little game. Hazard assessment. Evaluate every job function. That's the primary role of hazard assessment. Not just each job. Hey, we're going out to the field today to install a pumping unit. That seems like a pretty simple statement. Like, hey, I'm going to go outside and sit in the hammock. But it's a very different set of procedures and specific tasks that you have to do to set up a pumping unit. It's a complicated process. So not just the whole job, we're going to pump oil today. Okay, it's about as generic as you can get. What else is involved in that process? You know, is it passing through the treater? Is the flow line working properly? Is chemical going downhole? Is the ESP shut down? You know, what's going on out there in the field? What's going on in the shop? Can we actually produce this outcome? We need to be specific in every single area. We also have to determine what hazards are present. So 1, what are the job functions? 2, what hazards exist? 3, check for hazards to all parts of the body. Obviously, where can this impact me and which PPE is selected? I'll be honest. We're going to go through the different types of PPE, but PPE has been around since 1976. No one in this room, or electronically or actually physically, is questioning whether or not PPE is important. No one's doing that. So we're going to go over it pretty quickly, not because it's not important, but I really, especially in the hazard assessment portion of this, I really want to break down into why hazard assessment and being extremely focused on the job at hand is vital to a job success and everybody going home safely, which is what all these PowerPoints are about. So here also determining appropriate PPE is an important portion of this. But as we know, hard hat, safety glasses, steel-toed or composite-toed boots, some sort of glove for whatever task you're doing, impact, typically, sometimes cotton, rubber if you're working with oil. FR clothing, basically head to toe, can't be rolled up. You know, no one's out here trying to wear a Hawaiian shirt, you know, around the treater. It's just, no one's doing that. We're in FR, we pretty much understand. So, face and eye assessment. Can things hit me in the eyes? This one, though, you know, to be candid, especially in the shop, people just get complacent because the secretaries are walking through the shop, the HR person's walking through the shop. They're not stopping to put on safety glasses. So sometimes our workers are just like, you know, hey, you know what? If they don't have to do it, I don't have to do it. What's the big deal? But if you're working around, especially anything with metal, hammers, saws, grinders, and you know, really anything that can have a chipping or material being blown into the air, working with air hoses, you know, different things, dust can get in your eyes. You know, get in the habit of wearing safety glasses in the shop. I will say that's important. Same thing with respiratory protection. Sometimes we're working around fumes and stuff that we probably don't want to be breathing in all the time. I would highly recommend getting your lungs checked out if you're working around a lot of fumes. But you know, if you're working around the shop and there's stuff blowing around, or you're a welder, you know, and you're working with a lot of hot metal, molten metal that's producing, you know, gas into the air, I'd recommend, you know, wearing a respirator, the 3M masks, not the paper masks, but you know, the ones with the actual air filtration. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. There's loud noises. There's inexpensive, if not free apps on the iPhone. You can actually determine how loud it is in your work area. I'm not going to go too deep in, how many decibels you can be around. Baseline's 85 for 8 hours. If you download that app, you can at least see if it's over 85. You can look it up, or we'll talk about that in an upcoming power. Head hazard. Can something fall on me, drop on me, hit me, swing into me? Where am I? What's around me? Falling objects, exposed electrical, low-hanging obstructions. Typically, that's the one, you're working in an area where something can hit you in the head and you just kind of forget. The other day, just a little personal story here. I was down in the laundry room, and I live in a house that was built, feels like in the late 1800s sometimes. I reached down to get my sock, kind of stand up too fast, boom, right into an electrical outlet box. Who knows why it was right by the dryer? It's just been there forever. Hit my head on it, and I'm not going to walk around my house with a hard hat, but not paying attention, not thinking there shouldn't have been anything there. Well, if you get hit in the head with something, maybe not, but having to deal with that, the consequences of that action. Foot hazards. I really like this cut out of the boot. It gives you kind of a picture of, oh, these are the layers of protection. This is kind of the way it's built. You will notice, though, that the metatarsal part, which is from basically the top of that steel to about the third rung down on their laces, there's a guard there that will protect that, but these boots don't have it. So, the toe's great, but if something can drop actually onto the metatarsal part, that top curvature of your foot, you want to get some protection for that too. Falling, rolling, or sharp objects, electrical hazards, slippery walking surfaces, making sure that if I'm going to be walking around here, are these boots 3 years old? Because even though the steel toe is going to protect me, if the treads are worn off, I'm going to be exposed to slipping. Same thing, a couple years back, boots, couple years old, love the boots, most comfortable boots in the world, on the ice, work over rig, in front of everybody, and I'm the safety guy walking out there, right on my back, just destroyed, any reputation I had for being safe at all with this group of individuals. And yeah, it's not just the steel toes, are your treads safe? Cold weather, obviously, out here in North Dakota, no one has to tell us that it's cold in the winter. Skin absorption of harmful substances, severe cuts or lacerations, severe abrasions, punctures. All these things can happen to your hands. Obviously, the most common place of injury is in the hands of some sort. Finger, top of the hand. Obviously, we know not to wear rings in the oil field as well for the same reasons, but you want to select the right gloves for the right purpose. How do you know if they're the right gloves for the right purpose? It's pretty easy. You can go online and type gloves for, and then literally anything afterwards. Gloves for working in police forces, gloves for working in environmental conditions with hazardous chemicals and specify the chemical, gloves for working around construction, oil field. It'll tell you the type, it'll quote the ANSI standard. You'll have very clear direction on what type of glove. If you go to your safety person and say, I need this type of glove for the type of work, here's the OSHA standard, I promise you, especially if you get it in an email, you're probably going to get the glove. Clothing assessment. This type of clothing is great for if you're working out in the rain. This is some Tyvek type suits. They do have these that are FR actually. They're expensive, they're thick, they're not comfortable. Basically feels like you're wearing a tent from the 1980s, but it will protect you from both rain and flash if you're in a fire. Hot or cold materials or objects you got to take into consideration. Hazardous materials, welding hazards, heavy, sharp, or rough materials. Obviously, all these things have an impact on what type of clothing you're wearing. Excuse me. PPE hazard assessment. Knowing this, and the reason I've delved so deep into this because I can kind of kick by some of the slides in the next PowerPoint presentation. But so selecting eye and face protection is important. Wearing it properly and consistently is equally as important. Selecting respiratory protection, respiratory hazards. Wearing and caring for respiratory protection is extremely important. Making sure that they're washed, clean. You can use Dawn dish soap typically for both the masks and regulators. The filtration ones, such as this, you're going to check the seal when you wear them, clean them regularly, but you typically don't put the filters in Dawn dish soap. Obviously, you'd want to remove those first, but the rest of the respirator, Dawn dish soap and then letting air dry typically cleans it, disinfects it, and makes it ready to wear. Different types of hearing protection. You have canal caps, earmuffs, earplugs. If you need obviously, earmuffs and earplugs are the best. You can wear the canal caps, not pictured here, are the ones that go inside your ear, but they don't really protect you very much. Head protection. You want to make sure your hard hat is squared away. You want to make sure that it's inspected before each use. And, typically a cursory, just grabbing it and kind of pulling it a little bit, as well as looking for any deformities or cracks. And, keeping them clean. I recommend this. A lot of guys don't clean their hard hats, but it's not a bad idea. So you don't look like, you're not trying to take care of yourself. Selecting foot protection, obviously, once again, if you're working around chemicals, the SDS is going to tell you what type of footwear you need. If you're working around heavy objects, metatarsal guards, some sort of steel protection, and then the treads on the bottom, ice, snow, grease, oil. Depending on where you want to work, you're gonna need to select the appropriate type of foot gear. So obviously puncture resistance too is a big deal. You may have even seen these recently. They have bulletproof shoes. They have saws that are trying to grind into shoes, like just tennis shoes, and they're not able to cut through. There's some pretty incredible advancements in shoes recently. Wear and care of foot protection. Foot protection fits comfortably. Got inspected before each use. Once again, does it work? Is it torn? Are my treads tearing off? All these different things. As well as keeping them clean. It's important to some extent, but candidly, I don't clean my work boots that often unless they really get disgusting. Selecting hand protection, chemical resistant gloves. As I mentioned before, extreme temperature gloves, electrical work gloves. Depending on what type of work you're doing with your hands, you want to select the right type of gloves. If you're curious, you could type it into Google. If you read a few articles, you get some good information on what type of gloves is best for your hands. Fall protection. Tightness of fit to your body when working at heights is important. Really, and I couldn't say this better, 0 defects is the rule. It's the standard minimum. Like there should be nothing that makes you look at that harness and say, yeah, maybe I should get a new one. If that's the case, go get a new one. Tags must be legible. That's another part of it. You got to be able to read the tags. It's the same thing with fire extinguishers and a lot of other things. The tags, it's like you're not supposed to remove the tag on your mattress, and you're like, who's going to stop me? Well, if you do it in this case, OSHA's going to stop you. So definitely make sure your tags are there and legible. Connectors must move freely, and make sure your D-ring is properly. So wear and care of hand protection. Obviously, does it fit? Is it torn? Is it the right glove for what I'm doing? It's pretty basic. General work clothing. We talked a little about, hands in general. Hey, should I be wearing a wedding ring in this case? Am I wearing the right type of chemical resistant? And this is actually something a lot of guys don't know. Like, if I saw a guy cleaning out a treater or a tank, and I walked up to him and he was wearing some sort of gear, I'd be like, hey, do you know what's in that tank? They're typically like, yeah, oil and, whatever. I'm not really sure. It's just tank bottoms. I'm like, okay, so you know what chemicals are in that tank. Most guys are going to say no. They don't know everything that's in the tank, but they're wearing some sort of PPE that's protecting them. And so in the oil field, it's not always easy, and no one's running around with the SDS for what's in the tank bottom. No one really knows. So selecting the best PPE that's available, in some cases, candidly, in our industry, is unfortunately the best we can do. Unless we have a well history, of every chemical that's ever been pumped, that's difficult to do. Key points to remember in all of this before we get into hazard assessment is every job function we're assessing for hazards and for PPE. And generally speaking, PPE is pretty standard in the oil and gas industry. But when you're working around specialized materials or equipment or jobs, making sure you not only are wearing the appropriate PPE, but are assessing the hazards around you. And every part of your body's a part of that. It's taken into consideration. But first and foremost, somebody out there right now is thinking, but he didn't talk about it being the last line of defense. Yes, PPE is the last line of defense. We're assessing in the field for hazards that are going to hurt us at that time, after we've already done the due diligence of figuring out if there's a barrier between us and that hazard. If you learn that there's a better way to keep yourself safe, than the PPE and what the process tells you or what the safety person has told you, you should write that down and give that to the safety person. Help a guy out. If you learn a better way, let's pass that on instead of just kind of holding on to it. Shoot a text if you have to. It doesn't have to be anything formal. Give them a call, but communicate that forward. Proper wear and care of PPE is necessary as well to provide effective protection. Make sure you're consistently wearing the right stuff, and doesn't stops fitting well, just get rid of it. So hazard assessment. What are we trying to do? We obviously want to know what it is, what a JSA is. Most people don't need that communication, but also when one's needed and how one's conducted. I'm getting a lot of groans right now. I can hear them through the video here. So hazard assessment, we all know you're assessing your work site or situation. But as we talked about before, in each specific job task, individually, actually paying attention to what could happen. And you don't have to do this thoroughly every day, but at some point, if you're doing something outside in the field, you want to really delve down into what can happen here if we're not careful, or if timing's different, or if that bolt doesn't hold, or if that guy doesn't slow down. Like, what's going to happen? Really assess for the hazards. So JSA, as we know, writing down each step, identifying the hazard, and how we're going to mitigate it step by step. JSAs feel like a nuisance, especially if you're trying to, hey, if I can get this job done by 4 o'clock, I can make it home by 5. I got softball, then kids, to dinner by 8, or in bed by 8, depending. Get ready for bed, boom, ready to go, lights out 10 p.m. But if I have to fill out, 30 more minutes of paperwork, it throws off the whole day. JSAs can feel like a nuisance. So I recommend kind of having a language with your crew, especially if you're working with guys, where you really understand these hazards and you can expeditiously talk about them, write them down, assess them, and then determine together as a team how you're going to avoid getting hurt. So obviously you begin at the job site with the process. This is what we're going to do. Step 1, this is going to be step 2, this is going to be step 3. What could go wrong? If it did go wrong, would it be bad? Now, you can't get too specific about type of injury. Like, oh, he could sprain his left pinky finger. You're going to say that. You're going to say hand placement. You're going to say, if he's not careful, he could, fall down, and there's some sharp objects there that he could fall into. Rebar, there's rocks, there's piping, whatever. We're going to be able to see that, assess it, and know that there's some type of injury that's going to happen, but not, like, again, his left shoulder blade. So where to begin? Really easy spot. If you're not really paying attention, you're like, what's the laziest way to do a hazard assessment? You can look at the documentation of close calls and near misses if people are actually documenting them. Now, I kind of like to be lazy at work sometimes. You're going to say, of course you do, John. You're a safety guy. That would be true, but not because I'm a safety guy. I believe in working smarter, not dumber. You're expecting me to say harder there, but I'm just going to say dumber. If there's a smarter way to do something, doing it the dumber way is inherently dumber. It's not just harder, it's also dumber. But off that soapbox for a second, new tasks and positions, changing tasks, non-routine tasks, and routine tasks. These are for safety guys, this is what we're looking at for hazards. But back to the dumber thing, if you can document, doesn't have to be fancy. We don't need a 30-page document on, hey, these types of hammers we bought, they're junk and they're going to hurt somebody. That can just be a real quick memo. You document it, you pass it on. That's going to make someone's job easier because you're working smarter and you don't have to work harder and, i.e., dumber, in order to get that information and replace the hammers. Now, if you really have a manager who 5 guys are saying, hey, this is a dangerous tool, this is a dangerous way we're doing this, we just want to bring this to your attention, and you have a safety guy or a manager who's like, you know what, I just don't care if you guys think that's dangerous, then you probably want to, talk to his boss or really rethink the safety of your career in that position and working with that guy. But, if we honestly assess hazards, bring them up collectively in a calm manner, document it, there's going to be change that happens. So falling objects. Any objects that may fall from above would be considered a falling object. Probably couldn't get any more basic than that. If people are working overhead, I would just look up and say, yep, something could probably fall. That guy's working up there. Even if it's cell phone out of his pocket, yes, tools are going to be lanyarded off, but things can fall if people are working up above. That's why whenever I see these construction sites, if you've ever been to Nevada, in some of their bigger cities, or even any big city really, and you see these construction sites and people just wandering around equipment like no big deal, and it's like no wonder they have to put up these big high fences because people just aren't self-aware enough to know about the hazards around them. Harmful dust, mist, fumes. Oil and gas industry, this is a big thing. We have H2S, we have SO2, we have, petroleum distillates. We have a lot of things that aren't great for us to breathe in at close proximity to an oil well, as well as welding, a really molten metal, things like that, as we discussed a little bit earlier. There's a lot of things that can, when you breathe them in, not be good for your lungs. So make sure you have the right, PPE once again, once you identify those hazards. Energy sources, lockout tagout is probably the most misunderstood safety thing. And I think I don't know if it's in the wording or what, but really just, is there something that moves electrical, oil, other fluid, equipment? Is there something that moves here? Yes. Okay. Prevent it from moving and anything else from moving through it ever again while we're trying to work on it. And everything is a part of that. And then obviously, if you're preventing something from moving for whatever reason, you should communicate that via a tag. So tag and a lock always go together. Sharp objects. I have a picture of needles here. Hopefully there's not a lot of needles hanging out around your workplace. You may want to find a new, place to work or really get the police to come check that out. But, we also have a picture here of and if you have diabetics who are just throwing their needles around, that's also pretty irresponsible. But here we have a picture of a windshield, which typically, as they're kind of bonded so that they don't break through, but a lot of people know that they do. So one a lot of people don't think about is like, hey, if a big enough rock hits this is windshield is going to potentially break through. But even if and this is for like the office people, but in the field, obviously, there's a lot of sharp objects that can hurt us. Blades, sheet metal, that's typically where I've cut myself is metal. Paper, I am a safety guy after all. Got to watch out for, that paper, brutal. Extreme temperatures, any surfaces or process that could create enough heat to hurt us, we want to be careful of. North Dakota extreme temperature for us is typically more outdoor. We're outside. It's really cold out here. We need to protect ourselves. And, a lot of people think, well, if anything ever happens, and there's a big storm, I can just get next to the treater. And I'm like, yes, as long as it's lit. And if that well site is run on electricity, it's not too long until your gas pressure goes below, temperature. Now, the treater will stay warm for a while, but, it's not a forever type thing. So chemicals, oven stoves, on those types of things. Obviously, in our case, flares, things of that nature. Light radiation, not super typical in the oil field, although welding would be considered a light hazard. But there are lasers and a lot of other types of industries that people are working in that can hurt them. Flying debris, once again, grinders, any sort of brushes that you're using to clean tools, stone blades, whatever, they can definitely, buffing stuff can fly into your eyes. Even using an air hose to clean. Excessive noise, operations that generate, once again, over 85 decibels here. Earlier we had a picture of some ear protection. Here's a couple more photos. Motors, engines, pumps. Typically, backhoe, close proximity inside of a shop puts off about 115 decibels at peak. Not as much as I thought. I thought it would be a little bit more, candidly, when I did the audiogram there. But, no one's going to be standing right next to the engine. So even a few feet back because of their protective covering, that drops quite a bit. Some areas where there's not as much protective covering, you're going to need additional hearing protection, even potentially both plugs and muffs, depending on what it is. Job site design and layout. This is one a lot of people don't think about, especially safety guys. They miss the big picture here, where they're like, oh yeah, man, your fire extinguisher, whew, it's a good thing I caught that. It was going to expire tomorrow. But they're literally standing in a really hazardous place with lots of equipment moving around, and you got simops and you got fracking going on, and you got some guys over here digging trenches. There's a lot happening. He's like, fire extinguisher, whew, good thing you saved us on that one, Safety Bob. But yeah, hazardous configurations, fall hazards, another job site layout condition, we'd consider that. Low clearance, confined spaces, congested work sites. Fire explosion, big issue. Compressed gases, we work around them every day. It's when things go bad here, when it comes to fire and explosion, they typically go really bad. Obviously, you have lightning and other things like that. Even worse conditions. So, should you be working outside on top of tanks when there's lightning? Never ever in any circumstances because, uncontrolled hazards. And they're like, oh, everything's grounded. And I'm like, yeah, as long as the potential difference of that lightning and that ground, meet perfectly, then you're good. But if they don't, and that lightning strikes hot enough and hard enough, unless your grounding system is second to none, which, shoddy construction happens, you're probably going to have a spark and an explosion. What next? Once hazards are identified, this is where the safety people and the operations people really start working together. Effective measures of control must be established to eliminate or reduce exposure to acceptable levels. Acceptable levels, I want you to circle that in your mind, is something that really needs to be established as a team. OSHA has a standard, great. But it's not specifically saying on the Jackson 12-5H, on August 24th, 2019, this is how you appropriately handle the hazards in front of you. It's not going to do that. The book's not going to do it. The OSHA, if you brought out the inspector, he's probably not going to give you the right path in order to do it safely. Between you and your operational team and your safety team, if they're good leaders working together, you can come up with solutions if there's hazards that aren't already controlled. So next, obviously we select the appropriate control, acceptable levels, typically engineering, and the world is kind of great right now because there's so many different safety mechanisms and so many new technologies that are making drilling faster, safer, more efficient, helping America and especially this area produce much less expensively. And typically quality and safety, they really go hand in hand. Then administrative and work practice controls, such as how do you swing that hammer, Bob, and where's the wind blowing, where's our muster point, things that are a little bit more knowledge based of a safety control rather than actually a protective physical barrier. And then lastly, your PPE, which hey, if this fails, that fails, boom, we're going to hope that our hard hat protects that hammer from going through our skull because it was dropped from the crow's nest. There's typically hammers in the crow's nest. That would be odd. Probably shouldn't be up there with those. Engineering controls, eliminating exposure to the hazard, relatively permanent, typically permanent. As I said, physical barrier is better than hoping your hard hat protects you, right? Hey, maybe there's a platform right below the crow's nest. Well, there is. It's the derrick, but the tubing board. If you can. Anyway, what are some examples? Give you a few more. Administrative controls. We talked about that a little bit. PPE, definitely went through that one already. A summary, really wrapping this up for everybody. Thank you very much for your patience and bearing with us this month. A lot of information. Hazards, first of all, must be identified. And that's just a process of taking your time, slowing down, developing a safety language and culture with your crew, talking about what could go wrong, especially if you're working on workover rigs, especially if you're working on drilling rigs. If you're walking into SIMOPS situations where there's work going on that you don't understand, but you're still exposed to the hazards, spend 5 minutes talking to the guys. Hey, I'm interested in what you're doing. Could you tell me if there's anything that right now that could hurt me? Let's just have a conversation about it. JSAs are designed to help workers make a step-by-step process to identify and eliminate hazards. Engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE must be used in that order to reduce exposure. So it's a 1, 2, and a 3. First, physically protect. Second, knowledge base. Where should we be? Where should we not be? And lastly, you have the worst case scenario, something on your body to physically protect you. If you have questions, you can definitely email me at info@basinsafetyus.com. Any questions, stories, I can put them in our next videos, information about your work out there in the oil field. I'd love to hear them. Definitely use some information from Virginia Tech Environmental, the great school. They helped us out a little bit. Want to give them a shout out. So thank you very much. Have a great day, and look forward to you guys acing that quiz, communicating issues. So identifying hazards, everybody on that job site, looking around, for what could go wrong, and then talking about it. Plain and simple. That's all we have to do. You document it, of course, because if you didn't document it, the conversation never happened. So you should have somebody who's a good scribe. I don't like to use the most experienced guy, and I don't like to use the newest guy. I like to use guys in the middle for this. Everybody can do it. It's not super hard, but you want somebody who actually understands the tasks. And the most experienced guy, you want him helping direct the work. It doesn't mean he's the oldest, but the most experienced guy.